And that's what's happening with these kinds of overt censorship efforts emanating from elected officials in Washington over the internet, the thing that we most use and most depend on for the dissemination of information. They now control it. They are able to demand the removal of content. And even this appellate court ruling that we extensively covered. And I heard today from a very reliable source, I don't know if it's been publicly reported yet or not, that the Supreme Court has agreed to hear this case on appeal from the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit ruled that the Biden administration committed, in the words of the court, one of the gravest frontal assaults on free speech in the history of the judiciary. Even with that, Democrats continue to, out in the open, not only not hide it, but brag about it, boast of it. Their efforts to demand and force and pressure tech companies and social media platforms to censor political speech they dislike. And this is one of the most extreme examples yet. Now, this whole campaign, this recent effort, was initiated, as it so often is, by corporate media. That is one of the most remarkable parts about this whole censorship regime, is that it is led by, its primary advocates are, most vocal advocates are, people who are employees of media corporations who call themselves journalists. These are the primary censorship advocates in the United States. Journalists are the enemy of free expression, of free speech in the United States, corporate journalists in particular. And what happens is they have this roster of disinformation experts, this whole industry of this fake expertise funded by Pierre Omidyar and Bill Gates and George Soros. It really is that small handful of billionaires. I'm sorry if that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but under every disinformation rock, one finds that funding, along with funding by the U.S. government, British intelligence agencies. It's this tiny group that controls this industry and therefore defines what is and is not disinformation. And the newspapers like the Washington Post justify these disinformation experts' claims as a basis to publish articles claiming that some site ought to be censored because it produces so much disinformation. Even though the irony, of course, is nobody produces more disinformation than these media outlets themselves, and often the disinformation experts on whom they rely. So all this started on October 7th when the Washington Post published an article with this headline: Amazon's Alexa has been claiming the 2020 election was stolen. The popular voice assistant says the 2020 race was stolen, even as parent company Amazon promotes the tool as a reliable election news source, foreshadowing a new information battleground. Foreshadowing a new information battleground, meaning the Washington Post has opened up a new front in the information war because they are now finding new reasons why free speech platforms that refuse to censor, like Substack and Rumble, a new reason why they now need to be controlled and banned because they're responsible for contaminating Alexa, the noble and sacred oracle of truth, with claims about the 2020 election. And so much of this is going to intensify more than you can anticipate, more than I can anticipate, as we head toward the 2024 election, especially if, as looks likely, Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. There are no limits that they will recognize when it comes to doing everything possible to ensuring Donald Trump cannot win. They'll censor, they'll lie, they'll propagandize beyond what they did in the 2020 election when all media ratified the CIA lie, most media did, that Joe Biden's or Hunter Biden's laptops and the documents that came from it were inauthentic frauds and Russian disinformation. And then big tech censored those stories. That was extreme. Wait until you see what they're going to do to the 2024 election. So here's what the Washington Post, the seed they planted. Quote, amid concerns the rise of artificial intelligence will supercharge the spread of misinformation, comes a wild fabrication from a more prosaic source, Amazon's Alexa, which declared that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. Asked about fraud in the race, in which Joe Biden defeated President Donald Trump with 306 electoral college votes, the popular voice assistant said it was, quote, stolen by a massive amount of election fraud, citing Rumble, a video streaming service favored by conservatives. Now, there's so much packed in there designed to manipulate people's brains, including the fact that Rumble is not a conservative site. It is a site on which a lot of conservatives appear because they have escaped and fled from big tech censorship, but there are a lot of liberals and leftists on Rumble. There are a lot of independents, people who can't be characterized one way or the other because they're sometimes endorsing views associated with the left and sometimes with the right. There are a lot of people who are just anti-establishment, and a lot of demographic data suggests that at least 1/5 and even higher of viewers of Rumble identify as Democrats and another 20 or 30% as independents. But that's all, of course, a way of trying to suggest that Rumble is inherently untrustworthy because it's a right-wing site, even though it's not. Now, I don't know, are there really any people who regard Alexa as the place they go to learn about the world? Wikipedia, as we documented in a show we did a couple of months ago by talking to the Wikipedia co-founder, is one of the worst sewers of disinformation I've ever seen. Everything is geared toward promoting neoliberal orthodoxy. Anyone who dissents from it is smeared and with lies on that site. That site is a font of disinformation, but because it's intended to serve the agenda the Washington Post liked, you'll never see an article like this about Wikipedia. It goes on, quote, the 2020 races were, quote, notorious of many incidents of irregularities and indications pointing to electoral fraud taking place in major metro centers, according to Alexa, referencing Substack, a subscription news service, a newsletter service. Alexa contended that Trump won Pennsylvania, citing, quote, an Alexa answer contributor. Multiple investigations in the 2020 election have revealed no evidence of fraud, and Trump faces federal criminal charges connected to his efforts to overturn the election. Yet Alexa disseminates misinformation about the race. Even his parent company, Amazon, promotes the tool as a reliable election news source to more than 70 million estimated users. So, because there are a couple of Substack articles that claim the 2020 election was the byproduct of fraud, because Rumble doesn't censor that claim, and there are a few videos on Rumble claiming that, somehow the sacred Alexa got defiled because it used Rumble and Substack, and therefore the Washington Post is trying to create the foundation to say that these sites are dangerous and Amazon should ban them, should only allow the Washington Post and the New York Times to contribute to its services, but not sites that actually allow a multiplicity of views. So that was the Washington Post performing its function. Here now is a news outlet that noticed the following. It's called Must Read Alaska, and we fact-checked this article, and as we're going to show you, it's entirely true. It just does a very good job of explaining what happened. I didn't want to steal their narrative. I wanted to give them the credit they deserve. So there you see the headlines. DC Democrats want Amazon to stop Alexa from using Rumble and Substack as sources of information. So you see how it migrates from the Washington Post to the Democratic Party, all working together to try and constantly silence and marginalize whatever sites allow dissent and criticism of their orthodoxies. I obviously don't need to go through how many lies the Washington Post disseminated about the Iraq War, about the 2016 election in Russiagate. They got Pulitzers for endorsing the CIA unhinged conspiracy theory about Trump and Russia. They constantly called into question the authenticity of the Hunter Biden laptop to prevent Joe Biden from being negatively perceived by the American voter by maligning that evidence based on lies. They obviously spread countless lies about COVID and the war in Ukraine. And yet, here's what happens now as a result of that Washington Post article. Quote, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota and Congressman Joe Morell of New York are concerned that Alexa cites sources they don't approve of, like the video site Rumble, and they worry about the spread of misinformation leading up to the 2024 election. They definitely do worry about the spread of misinformation leading up to the 2024 election because they intend to disseminate a lot of it. And they don't want any sites that permit people who are there to document the propaganda and deceit that they're using in anticipation of the election. Quote, the demands for answers come after a Washington Post story worried that Alexa sometimes refers to Rumble and Substack as sources when answering questions. Here is the letter that Amy Klobuchar and Congressman Morell wrote to Jeff Bezos on October 19th, citing the Washington Post story and nothing else. Quote, Dear Mr. Bezos, And obviously, needless to say, the Democratic Party with Biden in the White House and their control of the Senate has enormous power over Jeff Bezos and his various companies. They award contracts to him and to Amazon worth billions and billions of dollars. They can punish Amazon and regulate Amazon. And he also is the owner of the Washington Post, the story that the outlet that published the story that they're now using. Dear Mr. Bezos, as we approach the 2024 elections, we write to express serious concern about recent reporting that Amazon Alexa, a virtual voice assistant tool relied upon by millions of Americans, is repeating false claims about the outcome of the 2020 elections and to request information about your efforts to combat this troubling content. Now, again, what's crucial here is these are not just ordinary citizens writing to Amazon with a complaint. These are people writing in their official capacity as members of the U.S. Senate and the Congress, knowing all the power and influence they have over Jeff Bezos. It reminds me a lot of when UK officials wrote to Rumble saying, I demand to know what you're doing to demonetize Russell Brand. Obviously trying to intimidate Rumble and other sites to cut off Russell Brand's livelihood, even though he's still, by the way, not been charged. Let's remember that Russell Brand still to this date has never been charged, let alone convicted of any crimes. They tried to, with these kind of, I demand you provide this information requests, try to coerce various sites upon pain of being banned in the UK from punishing Russell Brand. And that's what they're doing here. Quote, according to public records, when asked about the 2020 presidential election, Amazon Alexa cited unvetted sources to make false claims about election fraud. While Alexa relies on a variety of sources to answer questions, when asked about the 2020 presidential election, it appears that some answers were provided by contributors instead of verified news sources. What is a verified news source? Who verifies these news sources? Who determines what are legitimate news sources and what aren't? We're going to do a segment at the end about a new report from Brazil that Brazil's domestic intelligence agency, its CIA and FBI, illegally spied on me as reprisals for my reporting. Something that has happened many times in my career from other governments, including the Ukrainian government putting me on a blacklist, and the US government and the UK government doing all kinds of reprisals. That, to me, is what a real reporter is. That's how you can identify them, not by people who are constantly patted on the head by Democratic Party officials, people who are never threatening in any way to anyone in power. By verified news source, Amy Klobuchar and this congressman mean people who don't ever defy their worldview, who never question it, but who serve it. Quote, the spreading of election-related misinformation and disinformation is particularly troubling given the emerging use of artificial intelligence to mislead voters. With some ballots for the 2024 election being sent out as early as this December, it is important that proactive measures are promptly taken so that voters can trust the information that is provided to them. It is for this reason that we request responses to the following questions by November 3rd, 2023. What is Amazon's existing policy to address the spread and amplification of election misinformation and disinformation by Alexa? What steps have been taken to improve the accuracy of information repeated by Alexa? How is Amazon vetting responses from contributors, particularly responses pertaining to our elections? I mean, are you comfortable with Democratic Party officials being this fixated on what information is available to the public about our elections and which information ought to be banned? It seems very ripe for abuse to me. They go on, quote, in advance of the 2024 elections, what additional protections does Amazon intend to implement to prevent the spread of election misinformation and disinformation? What procedures does Amazon make available for users or others to raise concerns or complaints of misinformation shared by Alexa? Thank you for your attention to these important issues. We look forward to your response. I mean, this is as heavy-handed and despotic as it gets. And this is just one example, but it's a particularly vivid one to me because it shows you how these arms function. This all started with a Washington Post article claiming that precious Alexa has been defiled and vandalized by these ruffians on Substack and Rumble, who aren't even verified news organizations. And now it deserves a letter from the Senate and the House to Jeff Bezos saying, We expect you to fix this. We expect you to impose greater controls on the flow of information on all Amazon products, especially as it concerns our election. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.